It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. 1973's The Exorcist was one of the most important horror films ever made. It was a massive moneymaker. It was nominated for a boatload of awards, including the Oscar for Best Picture. It made horror legitimate beyond the gothic stuff that Hammer was doing. This was stuff for adults and not for teenagers on a date at the drive-in. Now, naturally, horror became something less about the classic comic booky type of monsters and stories afterwards, and started to turn more toward religious or mythical type of stuff. You know, the stuff that we were all told in Sunday school or as kids about what would happen if you fell off the path of the righteous. That was the real horror, right? But after all, The Exorcist was about a demon who took possession of a little girl, and the real power of that movie was the tale of a woman who just wanted to save her little girl in whatever way it took. Now remember, the McNeils in The Exorcist were not religious, so all this talk about demons and religions just kind of added flavor to that overarching story of that woman who was trying to save her child, and ultimately leading her to turn to places that she didn't really expect or believe in, because she was just frankly out of ideas or options. Now, a few years later, the next big year in horror would hit. 1975's Jaws is, by all accounts, really a monster movie, but if we place that outside the true horror genre, 1976 would be a massive year. That was when Stephen King's first adaptation is released with Carrie. And again, that's nominated for Oscars, particularly Sissy Spacek and Piper Laurie. Also, we get the focus of this week's episode of Monster Mondays, The Omen. One of the things that I think stands out about The Omen is that this is a horror movie about the son of the devil, and it stars big-time people like Gregory Peck and Lee Remick. These are not any old actors. I mean, Peck was an Oscar winner for playing one of the greatest heroes in film history, of course that being Atticus Finch. Remick was also a former Oscar nominee, and they would be drawn to this movie for its more psychological horror than the outright expectation that this would be some sort of cheap monster movie. And this was another instance of family drama being perhaps at the forefront of a movie set against the concepts of the terrible parentage of the seemingly innocent, albeit creepy-looking, child. The Omen also had the full backing from 20th Century Fox, and the cast of supporting characters really showed that too. Peck and Remick aren't the only recognizable faces in this movie. We have David Warner, who has a key role in this movie. While uncredited, we also have Leo McKern, who was a very popular character actor who I knew best from being the villain in the Beatles movie Help. Sheila Rayner, who played Alex's mother in A Clockwork Orange, is also in this. So it's a movie full of legitimate actors who had legitimately solid filmographies throughout their career. Oh, and we also have Patrick Troughton, the second Doctor from Doctor Who, appearing in this as a very key role as well. Now, The Omen would go on to become a massive box office hit. It cost just under $3 million to make, but it ultimately earned over $60 million in the US and Canada. It created a whole franchise with sequels, and just a year and a half ago, a prequel was released that I was mildly surprised to find was really quite pretty good. And there was even a remake in 2006, but maybe the less I say about the sequels and the remake, maybe that's for the best. But the biggest thing that came from the success of The Omen was its director, Richard Donner. The Omen was really only the third or fourth film that he directed in the course of a 15-year career up to that point. However, he turned out to be a pretty damn good director. After the success of this movie, he went on to make one of the most important films to an entire generation, Superman. And he'd follow that up with movies like The Goonies, Scrooged, and the Lethal Weapon series. His wife, Lauren Schuler, would ultimately go on to produce the X-Men movies for Fox. And even with Deadpool and Wolverine last year transitioning over to the Marvel Studios, she was still listed as a producer there. Now, The Omen is known for being one of those famed quote-unquote cursed films. Strange circumstances happened during the production that affected several of the crew and cast. Gregory Peck and a producer, Mace Neufeld, both had planes struck by lightning mid-flight. Writer David Seltzer's plane was also later struck by lightning. Another producer, Harvey Bernhard, had a plane narrowly missing getting struck by lightning. Another plane-related incident actually killed some poor people. There was a delay in a shoot, which led to a charter plane that would have been sent to get Gregory Peck, ultimately not being necessary. So Gregory Peck did not need to get that plane. He did not need to get on the plane. The next day, the crew learned that plane hit a flock of birds, crashed, and everyone on board was killed. That plane also crashed into a car that was just unlucky enough to be driving along the road at the time that the plane came down, and everyone in the car was killed. The occupants of the car turned out to be the pilot's wife and children. Now, some of the crew staying at a hotel nearly avoided being bombed by the IRA, who were attacking various locations in London during the time the crew was there. Animals went wild on set. Rottweilers attacked their trainers. Baboons attacked Lee Remick and Harvey Spencer Stevens, who played Damien. And the next day after that, at the same location, a lion attacked and killed a zookeeper. But the most crazy is the event that took the life of an assistant, Liz Moore. She was with John Richardson, who she was the assistant for, and they got into a car accident that sent a tire into the car's windshield and decapitated her. That was similar to another decapitation depicted in the movie. Apparently, even more strange occurrences took place many years later while a documentary was made about the Omen's curses, and even on the set of the first Omen, the movie that came out a year and a half ago. So there were even issues on that set. But let's see if we can conjure up some curses of our own and discuss the movie itself. So let's talk about the Omen. The movie opens on Robert Thorne, played by Gregory Peck, who is an American diplomat in Rome. And he's on his way to a hospital where his wife, Catherine, played by Lee Remick, was giving birth to their baby boy. But Peck is told outside her room that the boy died immediately following birth. At least that's what he's told. Father Spoleto, the hospital chaplain, floats the idea to Robert, who is very concerned about how the news would affect Catherine, who all she ever wanted in their time of being married was for them to start a family. So he is kind of convinced by Father Spoleto to maybe secretly adopt a child to avoid having to tell Catherine about their son. So the father presents Robert with a baby boy whose mother died while giving birth to him. Together, they named the child Damien and ultimately raised them as their own son, as if nothing had ever happened to their biological son. 5 years later, Robert is appointed ambassador to the United Kingdom, where Catherine finds a palatial home for them to live, saying that nothing is too good for the future president of the United States, showing that Robert has greater ambitions beyond being simply an ambassador to various countries. Now, at Damien's 5th birthday party, we start to see strange occurrences surrounding the boy. A large Rottweiler shows up on the property and starts to consistently show up on the property. After seeing it, Damien's overly doting nanny, Holly, publicly hangs herself, declaring that she loves Damien and it's all for him. And at the party, we meet photographer Keith Jennings, played by David Warner, who begins following Robert and snapping some pictures of the ambassador. And later, Robert is visited by Father Brennan, played by Patrick Troughton. And he arrives to deliver a warning about Damien. He pleads with Robert about accepting Jesus as a savior and take communion as soon as he possibly can. Only then would he be able to fight the son of Satan, who will take everything from Robert and make it his. He says that he was there the night his son was born. He knows everything about Damien, but security escorts him out before he can explain what Damien's mother actually was and who she was. And on his way out, Jennings spots Brennan and takes his picture. Later, a mysterious woman named Mrs. Baylock arrives to become Damien's new nanny. Now, neither of the Thorns sent for her, but she says that it was the agency that she worked for, that also Holly worked for, that saw the story about Holly in the paper and hired her to come there. Now she introduces herself to Damien and tells him that she is there to protect him. She also brings the Rottweiler into the house, explaining to Robert that he will be good for when he is away on long trips. But Robert tells her to return the dog because he doesn't think they need a guard dog. And if they do decide to pick a dog, he will be a part of the decision process, not her. So she ultimately does not do this, and the dog specifically guards Damien, even from his own father. Now, Mrs. Baylock tries to prevent Damien from attending a church wedding, but Catherine's like, no, we're taking him to the wedding, so it's not her place to make those types of decisions. But Damien himself violently resists going into the church by clawing at Catherine and pulling at her hair until they drive him away from that church. Catherine and Damien go to a zoo and ride like one of those ride-along safaris, and all of the animals begin to react nervous and scared around Damien. This is where the baboons are found, and in the movie attack Catherine's car out of fear of Damien. And being aggressive animals, they are pretty aggressive about attacking the car. At a rugby game, Brennan approaches Robert again with a dire message to meet him, saying that his wife is in great danger. And once again, Jennings is there taking pictures. Robert finally meets with Brennan, who tells him that Damien is the Antichrist and that Catherine is pregnant once again. And Damien will kill the unborn child and Catherine. And after it is certain that Damien will inherit everything from Robert, Damien will then kill Robert and establish his counterfeit kingdom on earth and begin what was prophesied in the book of Revelation. After leaving the meeting with Robert, Brennan is caught in a crazy windstorm and he tries to find refuge in his church, but a weather rod is struck by lightning, causing it to fall and impale Father Brennan. Now, Catherine does discover she's pregnant. She tells Robert that she no longer wants to have any more children. In fact, she's not even sure she really wants to be a mother to Damien. There's something wrong with him. But she wants an abortion. And her doctor even tells Robert that she thinks Damien is something alien or possibly even evil. And she's gotten the idea that Damien is not hers. The doctor agrees an abortion would probably be best, but Robert denies that, saying that all of this was foretold by Father Brennan, and he's adamant to see that this pregnancy goes through and that she's not harmed by it. However, at home, Catherine has a peculiar accident in which Damien knocks her over the railing from the second floor and causing her to fall to the first floor, where she breaks her arm, has some internal bleeding, which of course leads to a miscarriage. At the hospital, she begs Robert to not let Damien kill her. Now, about those pictures that Jennings has been taking throughout the first half of this movie, he starts spotting strange things about each picture he snapped, both at the birthday party and of Father Brennan. Brennan's pictures, no matter how many times he develops it, the zoom in or the different pictures he takes of Father Brennan, there is a shadow of something pointing straight at his head. And it looks something like a rod. Seemingly each picture that he took of all of these people foretold their doom. The rod pointed straight at Father Brennan, a peculiar shadow that hangs around the neck of Holly, their original nanny. Jennings shows the pictures to Robert, and what's more, Brennan's autopsy showed that he was dying of cancer, and on his inner thigh, he had what was labeled as a birthmark that looked like 3 6s. Jennings takes Robert to Brennan's small apartment. There, they find 47 crosses hanging on the wall, along with thousands of pages from the Bible, covering each inch of the walls and even covering the windows. Among the various clippings from newspapers and journals, Brennan has information on the thorns, as well as a peculiar astronomical event that happened on the day Damien was born, a comet that changed its shape and brightness to resemble the Star of Bethlehem. Robert reveals to Jennings that his biological son died, and he does not know whose son he is raising. Now, Jennings wants to help him figure out who Damien really is because, well, he took a picture of himself in the mirror at Father Brennan's, and that revealed that Jennings is also seemingly marked for death. Now, the pair go to Rome and discover that the hospital burned down after a terrible fire 5 years ago, and all the records were destroyed, and most of the staff was killed. Now, Father Spoleto survived, but he was badly burned, rendered mute, and blinded in one eye. He gives the pair information about a cemetery where they can find the graves of Damien's mother and a child that he assumes is, where the Thorns' actual biological son was buried. Inside her grave is the carcass of a jackal, and inside the child's grave is a baby with a crushed skull. The Thorns' actual son was murdered just after his birth so that they would adopt the Antichrist and raise him to fulfill the prophecy. Robert and Jennings are attacked by a roving gang of Rottweilers, but they ultimately escape. Robert then warns Catherine that she must leave London immediately, and he's arranged for a man from the embassy to pick her up and get her to a transport that will take her to Rome. However, Mrs. Baylock shows up at the hospital and throws Catherine to her death from her hospital room's window. Now, Robert and Jennings travel to Israel where they meet with an expert in the field of Antichrist exorcism. Yes, that's a real thing, or at least I want to think that it's a real thing. But there they meet Carl Bugenhagen, who's Leo McKern, who he tells Robert that if Damien is truly the Antichrist, he will bear the same birthmark of the 3 6s. He then gives Robert 7 daggers that will kill Damien as long as he does it on hallowed ground, and that his blood must be spilled on the altar of God. The first dagger will extinguish the physical life of Damien. Then each of the other 6 daggers will form the symbol of the cross and extinguish the spiritual life of the Antichrist. Now, Robert initially balks at the thought of murdering a small boy, but Jennings says that he'll do it if Robert won't. But just then, an accident occurs in which a truck carrying a pane of glass slides off the back and decapitates Jennings. Robert now understands that this is the only way to rid the world of the Antichrist, and he returns home to check the sleeping Damien's scalp for a birthmark. And when he finds it, Mrs. Baylock attacks him, but he ultimately kills her by stabbing her. He then takes Damien to a church to commit the ceremony that will ultimately kill the Antichrist, but his erratic driving causes the police to follow him. And at the church, Damien is freaking out and Robert's begging for God's forgiveness, but before he can stab Damien with the first dagger, the police arrive and shoot him. Robert and Catherine are given a double funeral, and Damien now stands with the President of the United States and the First Lady. He turns to the camera and smiles at us, knowing that he's victorious. So let's talk about 3 things that I like about The Omen. I start with the general plot of this movie. This is a fantastic suspense thriller. It's that element that attracted someone of Gregory Peck's caliber to this film. This, like I said earlier, this isn't some cheap monster flick. It plays very similarly to how a novel would play out. You have a cast of characters that you really get to know very well, and a mystery at the heart of a very specific decision that was made by one of these characters in a moment of weakness. The rest of the movie plays out with that character unraveling what actually happened to lead to his current life unraveling the way it has. And the best part is that there's no happy ending here. The devil wins. Damien Thorne would eventually grow up and, by the third film, gain political power and is very nearly elected president of the United States. I know I'm not here to talk about the sequels, but everything that happens is built right into this plot. Jennings talks about the biblical scholars and the theologians believing the Antichrist will be brought up and born through politics. Between the Thorns dying and Damien continuing on, and that suggestion that made that Damien will rise through that sort of influence and power, it's like this movie already came pre-built with a continuation in mind. The sequels are of varying quality, of course, but this movie's own plot is full of intrigue and leaves us thinking about the implications of this movie's series of events. And this is also all heightened by Jerry Goldsmith's Oscar-winning score as well. Next, I really like the death scenes in this movie. Now, because this movie is less a straight horror film and relies more heavily on the suspense thriller elements and the family drama that's going on within the Thorns, the death scenes are actually shockingly horrific and well set up. Naturally, the first one is Holly's hanging. That's disturbing in a lot of ways. Already, you had Catherine a little curious about Holly enjoying being photographed with Damien, almost doting on him like she's his mother. But then her odd declaration to him just before leaping to her death in front of a whole bunch of kids is something you don't really forget. And honestly, it's maybe the death scene that's best remembered in this movie, and that includes an awesome decapitation of David Warner and Patrick Troughton getting impaled. All of these are great effects that are well shot. Catherine's demise is also well shot and actually a very scary scene. So she's got this broken arm and she can't take her nightgown off all that easily. She's also, so she's wrestling with that when she sees that creepy ass Mrs. Baylock waiting for her in the shadows. And then she doesn't just get tossed to the ground from the window. No, she goes through the roof of an ambulance, and that blows the doors open, and we see her body bloodied in the back of the ambulance. It's shocking because you could see Gregory Peck dying in this movie, but poor Lee Remick is run through the grinder here. She's the first to also get the sense that something is wrong with Damien, and you just don't typically expect mothers to die, even in horror movies. Finally, that little Damien sure is a creepy kid, huh? Harvey Spencer Stevens didn't really have much of a career outside of The Omen, but damn, he's creepy in this. He was 4 at the time that he was cast, but what actually won him the part wasn't creepy looks or those icy blue eyes. It was attacking Richard Donner at the audition. I mean, granted, Donner urged him to attack him, but Stevens punched him in the balls during the attack. And that won him the part and forever changed the opinion of anyone or at least any opinion that I have of someone named Damien. Seriously, if I hear someone is named Damien and he's younger than the age of this movie, I always got to give that dude a side eye. But that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Wednesday Film Seizure podcast and the Monday afternoon Monster Monday show at your favorite podcast providers. We also upload this stuff to YouTube. And you can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. And next time, things get a little hairy in England's capital as I go back to some really classic stuff with Universal's first werewolf movie, Werewolf of London. So until next week, stay spooky.